I recently found this Minotaur at my local hobby store, and he looked like fun to paint. I also recently learned that the only on-the-ground involvement that the US had in Greece during the Second World War were covert operations, sabotage, and espionage. And that may seem like an unrelated piece of trivia, but by the end of the video it should make sense. The first step, as usual, was to assemble the participants of this encounter, starting with removing everyone from their runners, and gluing them together, of course. These 1:48 scale soldiers are from Tamiya, with a nice selection of weapon options and different poses. They also happen to be closer to wargaming scale than their 1/35 scale counterparts, which actually made them a lot smaller than they probably should have been to face off against this particular Minotaur. This Minotaur is from Dungeons and Lasers, manufactured by Archon Studio, whose plastic kits are an absolute joy to put together. I've put together a number of their kits in the past, including Squidmar's Dragon last year. I'm always impressed by their engineering. And of course, assembling this guy was no different. Everything went together super cleanly. There were essentially no seam lines and very, very minimal cleanup. With all of the minis assembled, it was now time to move over to the base. The concept is an ancient ruin, like you'd see on Crete, which is an island off the coast of Greece, where the legend of the Minotaur is from. I'll be using XPS foam and gluing it down to this canvas board. I glued those together using some foam-safe super glue. I flipped that over, and I trimmed everything down nice and flush using my hot wire table. Next, I glued some lower wall sections at an angle on the base and repeated the same trimming process as before. Having elements at an angle rather than squared is just a subtle and effective way of adding interest to any diorama. I sliced up some trim pieces to give the hallway a little bit more detail, and then off camera I made a little pillar. And the pillar may not read as Greek because it's not round. I'm sure that there were some rectangle pillars at least somewhere in Crete. I should have done this earlier, but I only just remembered. So I cut out a little spot to make some stairs, which I also made on my hot wire table. After that, I began gluing all of the details in place. There's always something very satisfying about working with XPS foam. If you're considering getting into diorama building, one of the first things I would recommend you do is to get comfortable working with XPS foam. It's really hard to beat its versatility. One of the main benefits of this stuff is its ability to mimic other materials. You can carve into it to make it look like wood, or in this case, you can scratch it and chip it to look like stone. And even if you snap it, like you'll see me do in a second, it creates a very organically rocky texture. And this isn't sponsored by Big Foam or anything like that. I just think it's one of the best crafting materials there is. I wanted the top of the pillar to have been smacked and cracked and fallen down on the pavement below, which it was looking great. And I should have just left it, but after gluing the top of the pillar down and some larger foam pieces as the chips and debris, I went back in with some sand and mud texture, which wasn't necessary. I carved a nice little crater and some cracks down in the ground, and all of that got covered up by the sand. So if I was able to do it over again, I would not have added the sand or the texture paint in this instance. But retrospect is 2020. After all that had been glued down, it was time to protect the foam with some Mod Podge, and I didn't want it to look glossy, so I used the super matte stuff. After smearing that all over the base, I used some isopropyl alcohol to hide all the brush strokes, and then I prompted that to dry. And then the time to paint had come, so I threw the Minotaur on a painting handle as well as all of the soldiers. Once everyone was ready to be painted, I broke out an airbrush and some primers. And if this is your first time here, you may still be wondering, why is this goober putting World War II minis on a diorama with a Minotaur? And that's a great question. The short answer is that I had all of these minis on hand. so they all ended up on a diorama together. The long answer is I came up with a premise for a story. I'll go back and forth between talking about what's happening on screen and the backstory from here on out. Also, I really struggled to achieve the look I was hoping for on the base, so as you see me painting it and repainting it and question why I'm doing what I'm doing, don't worry, I also am asking the same question. Like I said at the beginning, the US didn't have any official boots-on-the-ground activity in Greece during World War II. But they did have some covert operations, and the details about one of those operations has recently been declassified. In 1941, German paratroopers landed on the island of Crete and took it after a short offensive. While it was clearly an advantageous position to hold during the war, with it being smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, the real reason for the takeover was to find something hidden beneath the ruins of Knossos, the fabled lair of the Minotaur. If this creature still existed, it could be captured and tamed, and it could be used to great effect in the war, or at the very least, it would make for a legendary trophy. After establishing some shading with the airbrush, I broke out the wet palette and I started painting in the details. Messages from Crete were picked up on and deciphered, indicating that the Germans had discovered something potentially ancient and powerful on the Isle of Crete, and it was deemed significant enough to warrant the deployment of a special unit to infiltrate, investigate, and neutralize the threat, should it come to that. The team was assembled and they made their way to the island of Crete on a small fishing vessel, and they made it the last little bit of the way on a rowboat under the cover of darkness. The crew was expecting to have to avoid enemy patrols, but as they made their way inland, they surprisingly ran into nobody. Actually, as they made their way to their waypoint that they had been given, the lack of activity was quite unnerving. As the crew finally approached the dig site, they came upon quite a haunting scene. The floodlights lighting up the excavation were still on, but nobody was to be found. But something had clearly gone on a rampage through the surrounding ruins of the old palace, the town. Vehicles had been split and shattered, walls demolished, bullet casings were found everywhere, but nowhere to be seen was what was being shot at. In short, it was worse than they could have imagined. After wrapping up the paint job on this mythological Greek guy, I moved over to the soldiers. I probably should have given these guys a darker color scheme given their covert status, but I just followed the coloration on the box. I took the same basic approach to painting these guys, painting on the base coats, the midtones, and the highlights, and the details were having a little bit of trouble popping through, so I went back in with a shade color, a wash from Citadel, which I slapped over pretty much everything, and I was left with a result that I was really happy with. And now back to Crete. The team wanted to leave, obviously, surrounded by so much mayhem, but they had to find out what was going on. They had to get a positive ID and attempt to stop whatever this was in order to complete their mission. They were making their way through the ruins of the old palace above the dig site as quietly as they could when suddenly a pillar beside them was cracked in two and fell to the floor, barely missing them. They were all stunned and dazed. When they finally came to, they looked up and they could not believe what was standing above them. After all the miniatures had been glued in place, it was time to clean up the sides of the diorama using some wooden veneer, which I trimmed to fit every side and then stuck in place. I had to use super glue in a few spots to make sure that stayed put. Then I trimmed off the excess, and the last thing to do was to stain the sides of the diorama using some wood stain. And after that, I called it good. that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.